Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm really glad you came back. Today, we're going to build on the theme of what makes a sketch dramatic and more interesting and with more life, more action, more interest in general. And we're going to focus on a composition type to do that, which is the vignette. The vignette actually happens to be probably my favorite composition format and the one that I think has the most drama associated with it. So let's get started. Okay, let's look at a few examples of vignettes by way of explaining why I think they are dramatic and why that particular compositional format seems to work for sketches in particular. So let me share my screen here. Okay, this is obviously Florence, Italy. And the reason it's a vignette is that it has taken a very specific part of Florence and said, this is what I care about. This is what I think is special. I've selected it specifically, and the rest is just not that important to me, although enough of the setting is, because that's what makes it interesting. So a vignette does that. It helps you communicate your enthusiasm for some specific thing. Now, it doesn't have to be small, as you can see from this example, but it is specific. It has you have emotion about it, you care about it, and that's communicated with a vignette. Some people call vignettes unfinished paintings, and that's probably because there's a lot of unpainted area, which is quite intentional. And the reason for that is that the white spaces around that which you really care about are as much a part of the composition as the item itself. So El Duomo here is obviously extremely important, and it's even more so because I've left all of this white around it to say, look at the Duomo. All right, let's see another example. This has less white around it, but still it has the sense that the focus needs to be right here. This is what's important to me. These are some of my favorite things that happen to be on the floor together as sort of an odd combination, still life, and so I sketched it. But it's very clear what I care about in this. Let's look at another one. Okay, so here's my grandson, Lucian, and he was drawing on the floor, and this intensity of his involvement with what he was doing was really what I cared about and wanted to communicate. So you can see that around the surroundings are just barely suggested, and that the focus and the painting and the color is all pretty much in one place. What I've left as white is interesting in terms of its shape. Let's look at another one. By the way, vignettes are wonderful for people. Okay, this I did at a church in San Miguel, but for some reason the church itself didn't attract me, but it was on a very steep cobblestone narrow street, and I just loved the sense of steepness, and I loved that there was a lot of foliage. I loved that peeking through all that foliage was this sunlit yellow wall. So that's what I painted. And I left things going out into the white space, like here. This was a big tree, so in that case, I just didn't paint it. I tried to get the essence of kind of the drippiness and featheriness of the tree. Obviously, the sidewalk disappears, etc. So those are all techniques of a vignette, so that all this that is around it is as important as the street itself. Here's another one. This was in front of another church in San Miguel. Obviously, the church didn't interest me for some reason, but the fountain with the kids playing in it was really special. So you can also see that I just left a lot of stuff out. There's a whole city here. I chose to make an abstract sort of foliage-like background so that I could have some interesting shapes. Even the fountain is not finished because in the end, it's these three kids. And as you see, with this shadow going out, it makes the white spaces more interesting. So protruding out into the white in various ways, and same with this line, is all part of the composition. Okay, believe it or not, this was at another church. But the way the sun was hitting these steps and just making it completely white, and it looked like you were looking into a cave. Actually, that's a wall back there with the sun coming down in front of it. But then it made this beautiful silhouette of this fern. I was just very attracted to the light. So that's what this vignette is about for me. And I just suggested that it was a rock wall. This was a huge vine that covered the whole area. And again, like in the other one, just suggesting that it was foliage dripping down so that I could preserve some more interesting white areas around it. And so you can see that this goes into the white area, these stone suggestions, etc. This is a much more simplified one. It's simply my favorite plant in the sun. But again, you can see how things that are unimportant fade away. Another technique for a vignette that a lot of people use is to draw more than you paint. And so the painting, the color, really highlights what is important in this sketch. And everything else has a background role. And as I said, people are just fabulous subjects for vignettes. And I think it can be very dramatic if you sort of isolate people. That's a bad word today with COVID, but this is a different kind of, you separate them, you highlight them. And the pride that this man, I felt, was feeling in his much younger partner was what I wanted to convey. I tried to give enough information here with a tablecloth and a coffee cup or whatever it was to suggest that it was in a cafe. But truly, this was my focal point. And I think this is the last one. I often find little pieces of architecture or building that are interesting for some reason. And I certainly am not interested in those cases in sketching the whole building. So taking a chunk of a building like this, there were some broken bottles that somebody had thrown up there on these ledges, and there was a pigeon nesting. I thought the whole thing was kind of an interesting composition. So again, consciously leaving white and trying to make the white shapes interesting as much as the focal point. Okay, so this is a photo I took a couple of years ago in front of the parroquia in San Miguel of one of the San Miguel doll makers. And I've always been attracted to sort of their quiet intensity in what they do. This woman is sitting there and she feels very sort of at peace, or solid, I should say, just quietly going about her work. And I liked that, and I wanted to represent that in a sketch. Also, it was winter. They're putting up the Christmas tree here in the back, so I know it was winter. But look at how the sun was reflecting on her shoulder and her bag and her hat. It just felt like she was enjoying the sun. So that's the sketch we're going to do today. All right, so let's get on with the sketch. And I hope you enjoy the various, I'll talk it through a bit, the various ways in which I did that sketch to turn it into a vignette that I thought would have a little bit more drama than slavishly drawing exactly what I saw. Okay. So here's the sketch, and as you can see, I left all of the various parts of the world around her out, and that's the first decision when you're doing a vignette, is what do you include and what do you leave out. The only thing I wanted to include in the sketch was the woman, a couple of her dolls so it was clear what she was doing, and a couple of stones of the stone wall so that you knew where she was sitting. Another decision is, where do you start when you are painting? One option is to start with the negative color or negative painting around your object, which many people do. Sometimes I do that. This time I wanted to start with the largest shapes and really work on this multicolor wash, because as a first pass, I think it's the most beautiful way to apply paint. So as the bag moves into her clothing color, that's just fine with me. Okay, now we're going to start on some of the smaller spaces, but we're still basically working on the woman and her clothing, paying very close attention to what needs to be left white, and also to bring as much value variation as we can in this first wash. My process, if you've watched some of the other videos, you probably know that I start with a first wash like these that are multicolor and have a lot of value variation. And then when it's dry, I can come back and boost some of the darks and the form shadows, etc. But I want to make sure the first wash is done very quickly and with a lot of flow. Okay, now I'm fussing a little bit with the hat because I felt the hat was so important to this idea of light and her stillness and her quiet work. I wasn't too happy with the color, so I fussed a bit. But at any rate, you can see that I'm basically painting shadow shapes and softening edges to give it some sense of rounded form. So once I've got the first color, I'm going to come in and try to boost some of the values in a couple of places. I think I fussed with this one too much, but at any rate, that happens. Yep, here I am fussing a little more. Part of it too was wanting to get some texture granulation, and so I added a little of granulating paint. Now I'm looking at where the negative painting is going to end or touch. Which lines does it need to touch, and where does it need to leave a little bit of white? Basically, on her shoulder and hat, I want it to come right up to the line so we don't have a double line effect of both the negative and the pen work. But around the ribbons, I'm going to leave a little bit of white to highlight them. So I deposit some dark paint along the edge and then just pull it out in sort of a haphazard, squashy way, because I'm attentive to the idea that I want to have the shape of the white left to be interesting. So I'll come back to that a couple of times and see if I can improve that shape. Now in the photo you may remember that the background was actually very white, but that would not have been effective for highlighting her shirt and the sunstruck nature of one side of her. You see, I'm boosting the dark right along the edge of her body so that it's even more dramatic. And you can't see, but I'm doing the little doll that's on the wall next to her. And then I'll come back up. And I'm evaluating the shape that I've created, and I'm not too happy with that shape. It looks just like a mound. So since it's not interesting enough for a vignette, I'm going to come back and squirt a bit. There it is. See if I can get some more irregular, interesting shapes. And I'm liking that already a lot more. So that's a technique you can always use, because we are so inclined to make our shapes regular. We have to work hard to make them irregular sometimes. Now I'm my second or third pass on a sketch is either boosting the darks or adding detail. And in this case, I'm starting to work on the detail of the dolls and the ribbons and her shirt and things like that. And as I do them, they are all little multicolor mini washes even, so that there's some flow and interest in the watercolor itself. I'll go back and keep fussing with it a little bit to darken, like right now, to make sure that these dolls sort of pop out, because they're really the only detail in the whole sketch are the dolls. And they're very important to the meaning of the sketch. Okay, at this point I think that's right. I'm doing a couple of more details, and then I'm going to sort of fuss with whether or not I need to boost any darks. Ah, yes, I thought that this bag just didn't feel heavy enough. So put in some darks, and the same with her, where she's sitting and her clothing. It just wasn't heavy enough. And this is what I mean by boosting the darks. You try to cover as little as possible. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you try vignettes. They can be very powerful. And it can be about anything: your coffee cup, your slippers, the view out your window. Art is so important to all of us these days, so I hope this gives you another idea about how to bring that into your life. Okay, thanks a lot for coming, and see you next time. Stay safe.